Warning. This podcast contains true stories that are not intended for those missing a sense of humor. Any resemblance to actual events or allegations are purely coincidental. Before listening, please relieve yourself, as possible adverse effects include spontaneous bladder leakage, mild hysteria, and sudden release of dopamine. Names have been changed to protect the innocent and guilty. Everyone is innocent until proven guilty, Karen. Welcome to Coding Consultant Confessions with Tony Elholmes, Stacy Buck, and Victoria Mole. Unfiltered, unedited, unapologetic. In this podcast, Tony, Stacy, and Victoria come together to share unique perspectives, engaging dialogue, entertaining commentary, and funny stories for those working in the healthcare industry. And now, here are your hosts, Tony, Stacy, and Victoria.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Coding Consultant Confessions. And today we're going to talk about red flags in your job search. So you're looking for a job, and that's great. But before you start applying or saying yes to that very first job offer that you get, make sure you listen very closely because we're going to discuss some of the red flags you might have in your job search so you don't wind up wasting your time on a dead-end position. Hey everyone, I'm Victoria Mole. I am joined today with my co-hosts, Tony Elholmes and Stacy Buck. And I thought what we would do today, ladies, is I want to focus on kind of like three main components. Like, first off, you need to know places to search for your jobs and what red flags we might be looking at when you're doing your job search. Maybe some things on resumes, and then that interview and hiring process. So to start out with places to search for jobs, I thought we could do like do we think this is a good thumbs up or a thumbs down? Like, is this a red flag? And I want to start with the first and most common one that we think of, especially in our industry, and that's LinkedIn. Because I think the way that LinkedIn has been utilized in the past couple of years has kind of transformed. And where it used to be uber professional, now we're starting to see this muddying of the waters, and a lot of people have different opinions of that. But let's focus on as far as trying to find a job on LinkedIn. Let's focus in on that. So Stacy, do you think that LinkedIn is still a good place to look for a job?
I would say yes and no to that. I don't think that there's really a straightforward answer. Yes, in that you have the benefit of networking to find jobs and get additional information from people and learn more about people. But with any social media site, even LinkedIn, you have scammers that create accounts, get on there, start reaching out to people, might have job postings. I mean, I know it happens a lot in Facebook, I would say. Definitely compared to LinkedIn. But I think that there's always potential for anybody to set up some type of fake profile and then try to lure you into something. And I know we'll talk about the different red flags, to look for in certain situations as we get into the episode. So with any source that you're using, I would just say kind of like buyer beware and always do your homework and your research. And the benefit of social media is you can reach out on social media and ask people about the job opportunities and about these employers that are out there. If it seems too good to be true, it probably is not true. That's just a general rule.
What about you, Tony? What do you think about job searching on LinkedIn? Is it still a viable source for jobs?
Yeah, so I think just to piggyback on what Stacy said, you've got to be basically skeptical of everything that you see. I think LinkedIn has transformed so much in the past few years. It used to just be a place where people put their resumes, and it was like, this hub of activity for recruiters and employers and people that were looking for jobs. And then it's transformed into this epicenter essentially for business networking. And there's been a lot of bells and whistles that have been added to the platform. I will say that when I used to do recruiting for some of my physician clients, when they would ask me to post job postings because they're looking for nurse practitioners or physicians, it is incredibly easy to post a job. Anybody can create one. There's no level of security. There's no verification. So you've got to be super careful about vetting the people that are contacting you. Look at their profile. If they've got 5 followers, like that's a red flag. If the company profile, if it looks sketchy, if it looks suspect, those are red flags that you want to be mindful of. I look for things like how many followers and how long has this page been around? Is there any activity? Are they posting blogs or people mentioning them? Do they have employees listed on their LinkedIn page? And then also take that information from LinkedIn and try to corroborate it with a website, or looking at Better Business Bureau or like Glassdoor, like so many cool tools that weren't around when I was in the game. When I was looking for a job, you just kind of left to figure it out on your own. Now the internet is a very powerful place. So I do think that LinkedIn is probably one of the best places to find a job, a reputable job. There's a lot of recruiters on LinkedIn. I have a network of recruiters that I consistently refer people to. Recruiters, that whole thing has changed in the last few years as well. It used to be stigmatized, working with recruiters bad. Now it's the only way to get your foot in the door in a lot of health systems because they've completely outsourced the initial hiring process. So LinkedIn is a thumbs up for me.
I would agree. I think for the most part, LinkedIn is still a good resource. And to echo what you said, Tony, connecting with those recruiters, I think is really awesome. It's cool to see, though, how much it's expanded over the years. It used to be, I would have like my group of I'm like, oh, okay, so you can connect with these like 5 people on LinkedIn and they post jobs. And now, you can't even keep up with it anymore because there's so many. I think the one thing I do wanna mention is oftentimes we do see a lot of heavy recruiting on LinkedIn where they're hiring for contract work, and a lot of coders don't understand that initially. So when they look at that job listing and they're like, "Hey, we're hiring 100 coders for this HCC position," you have to also understand that when they're hiring for a ton of people, it's usually not full-time permanent work. It's usually a project contract type of work. Um, yeah, I think it's still good. I would just be cautious about some of the typical things that you have to be careful with on social media is that if you're on LinkedIn, you can easily fall into that trap where you're just scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. And now instead of being productive and looking for a job, you're just kind of like reading posts, getting worked up about things and just more so time wasting than actually doing productive things to build your career. The next one on my list is Indeed.com. So I still like Indeed.com. I haven't been looking at it a lot actively myself. I was checking, I think just the other day because I was doing some research, I think, on management positions and kind of looking at who's posting salaries and stuff these days. That's one of the things I like about Indeed. I think more so than some of the other platforms is they seem to have positions that are a little bit more open about the salary ranges, and salary transparency is important. I know, there's 2 sides to that coin. You don't want to attract people just because they want the job because it's like, "Oh, I saw that this pays a ton of money." But also you don't want to waste people's time if you don't have a budget that can fit within their needs. So, I think there's a lot of good search on Indeed.com. I think it can help you navigate to the right type of positions that you're looking for because it's just so easily searchable. You can type in what type of work you're looking for, or if you have a certain credential, and you can search for jobs based off of your credentials. And I don't see as much garbage filtering into Indeed.com as we do some of the other platforms that we've used in the past, but I could see that starting to happen where it's getting a little bit more flooded. Stacey, have you had any experience with using Indeed.com?
I have used Indeed.com one time and one time only, and that was when I was researching salary information. I personally haven't had to do a job search in over 20 years. So the typical job search websites that everybody uses, I'm not on. I know that a lot of people use Indeed. That's one that's very popular with medical coders. From what I hear about it. And I do like the fact that I feel that they have that good salary information. Again, that's why I went out there. So if you're looking for a job and you want to get an idea of what's being paid, in those positions, obviously that's going to give you a range and give you an idea. I would always tell anybody, anytime you're looking at salary information anywhere, take that with a grain of salt, because there are a lot of different factors, as you ladies know, that are going to play into what kind of salary somebody gets in a position. People tend to focus on that high end of the salary, but there's a lot of other factors as far as where you're located, the type of setting, and all those other things that go into it, and also the level of experience as well. But from what I hear across the board, Indeed is one that a lot of the coders are going to and finding work there.
Yeah, I agree. I think Indeed is another great place. I think it's gotten better over the years. I think Indeed, the company, has kind of dialed things in a bit more. Salary transparency, I think, is really key. I think I just heard something about California is going to require all jobs to post salaries starting in a few years. So I think that's really important, because you waste people's time when, you're lowballing or you're not transparent about salary. I think that could definitely be a red flag. In terms of Indeed, I think you have to be really mindful of your keyword search terms. So when people are posting those jobs, they may not title them as medical coder or medical coding. So you just have to be mindful of that. I know Victoria's got a bunch of videos on the types of words you want to look for in keyword search terms. But that's really important with Indeed, because it tends to be very saturated with lots of other different types of jobs. And if you're not, creative in the search terms that you put in, then you may not yield the best results. So Indeed is a thumbs up for me, I think, with obviously using caution.
So that just triggered something. I was looking at Indeed the other day when I was saying I was looking through like management positions and roles, and one of the job descriptions that come up, and that's another thing I like about Indeed, is it gives you those full job descriptions, so you can kind of like see what they're if you're doing a comparison of different jobs. One of the things I saw in one of the job descriptions was, in this role, it said you had to help with the transition to ICD-10. So clearly someone probably hadn't been interviewed for that role in a while, so they just pulled out whatever the last, job description they had off the shelf was and threw it up online from the recruiter. And there's some out-of-date information in there about helping with the ICD-10 transition, which transpired already several years ago.
That's
Do
so
I think
funny.
that could be do I think though that that could be a red flag? That's kind of debatable, because I think it could indicate that maybe some people that are related to the hiring process don't exactly have all the details of maybe what they should be looking for, or aren't keeping up to date on maybe even other aspects like the credentials, or maybe they've not even looked at the salary range in a while. So if I would say, use a little bit of caution if you're looking at a job description and you see something that doesn't quite match up, because I think if you've looked at some of the different postings out there, you do occasionally even find things that will say like, you need to know ICD-9, and it's like, okay, there might be like this many positions out there that you still might need to use ICD-9, but probably not like a coder 1 position right now.
That's so funny. That reminds me of the old ICD-9 book where you had the volume 3 with the PCS codes, and like it was so different. Yeah. I mean, it's possible to work with ICD-9, right? If you're auditing or doing a project prior to 2015, then yeah, of course.
Yeah.
But that's a big red flag, I think, because it shows that it's not a current position.
Right. So the next one on my list is industry specific. So we have codersdirect.com. And you know what? I haven't seen a lot of activity from them in a while, but I still have coders that swear up and down that it's a great place and they've found positions there. Stacy, have you heard much buzz about codersdirect.com?
So that is one that I always have referred coders to in the past because I like that they can search by credential. I think that's very helpful, to go in and plug in the credential and see what job opportunities are open. I think one of the reasons why you probably haven't seen any activity is because the gentleman who was running that, I cannot remember his name off the top of my head, but not too long ago posted on LinkedIn that he was retiring and he wanted someone to buy Coders Direct from him for $2,500 and take over Coders Direct for him. I don't think that's happened, or if it did, if somebody took it over, there's nothing new going on over at codersdirect.com. So that is one that I do pop over to on occasion just to see what's out there. So that could explain why that one's been a little bit more quiet lately. Do you recall his name, either one of you? Was it Ron?
There were two guys that were originally involved, Mark and Rich.
Rich. Okay. I knew it started with an R. Rich. Yes. Rich was the one who had posted on LinkedIn. So I didn't see anything else about whether or not someone had decided to take over that or not.
I'm glad that you mentioned that, Stacey, because when I looked at their website, I was just kind of preparing. I was looking and I didn't see anything current. And I was wondering because just a couple years ago, I mean, they were all the rage, right? Everybody was talking about Coders Direct. So yeah, I think they've kind of fallen off.
And that's a shame. And I feel like it's kind of a tough one because that is such a great organization. But I don't know that they were making a ton of money to warrant buying them for $25,000 because most of what their income from what I understand, was basically like ad revenue. Like you would pay them to put something out on an email blast, or you would pay to advertise your workshop. And I think I had actually advertised some workshops with them once or twice, and didn't get any hits. I was a lot more successful just posting them online. And I think a lot of people now, they can just post something on Facebook and it gets shared, by 60 different chapters. So it's not really a worthwhile investment to have it go out on the email blasts.
It was $2,500, not $25,000.
Oh, $2,500. Okay.
$2,500, which actually, Victoria, honestly, it's not a bad investment for you to do that, considering the platform you have. It would be a nice little plugin. So
I know, right?
If they're still available for $2,500, there could be some good synergy there to get you some more revenue. Just saying.
I'll have to, maybe I should look into that. I'd have to delegate it though to someone else. I don't know that I want to sit and do job postings all day. Maybe I could make that someone's internship program, like coordinate it out that I buy it. But then I also am like, hey, I have an unpaid internship to help get your apprenticeship removed. You're going to post. You're just going to run codersdirect.com for me.
Coders Direct. Well, I think the domain name is probably worth that much alone.
Yeah. Oh, man. So next one on the list that I have is Craigslist. What about you, Stacy? What do you think about looking for jobs on Craigslist? Because I've heard people are still out there looking on Craigslist.
I don't think anybody should be looking for anything on Craigslist. A job or anything else like otherwise. I think that's just like a bad thing, like waiting to happen. Definitely big like red flag there. I mean, think about it. What kind of jobs would you find on Craigslist? Okay. I don't think about professional, jobs like we have, like in healthcare, like the medical coding profession. Jobs that are being advertised on Craigslist probably are illegal. That's just like my first like gut instinct on that. That they're being camouflaged as other things. And maybe they're seeking a lot of massage therapists over there on Craigslist or something. I don't know, but that's definitely somewhere I would not send a medical coder to or an HIM professional to, because anybody who's serious about a job would never post over there. But I have in the past heard about people going there and looking. I didn't even know that Craigslist still existed. So apparently it does. It still has some uses.
So I have a funny story to share. Okay, so one of the best jobs that I ever got was on Craigslist. So this was in 2011. So this was 12 years ago, right? A long time ago. I was working for a hand surgery orthopedic practice, and I absolutely hated it. Like, it was the most toxic environment. Like, everybody that was in the billing and coding department was like, oh, just nasty. It was not a fun place to work at all. And so I remember one day I got so pissed off because this one lady was like telling me what to do. And she was like the de facto boss. And, she kind of appointed herself in that role. And so I was like, I'm out of here. So I went to my manager and I was like, I'm putting in my 2-week notice. I don't want to do this. And she was like, I totally understand. We've had so many complaints about, this person. She's like the ringleader. And so I was like, yeah, I'm just not happy. And she said, this was on a Thursday. I believe it was a Thursday. Yeah. She was like, just go ahead and pack up your stuff. No big deal. You don't have to give us a 2-week notice. You can leave. And so I was like, okay, thank God. I was so miserable. So I walked out of there and I was like freaking out because, this was a long time ago, back when you didn't quit a job before you had another job lined up. Like, you just didn't do that. It was like, no way. Now you could totally do that. People do that all the time. No big deal. But at the time I was, kind of kicking myself because I had impulsively made this decision to basically walk out. And so I was like, oh shit, I better find a job. So I went on Craigslist, and this was back when Craigslist, there was no Indeed, and LinkedIn wasn't really hot back then. Craigslist was the place to go outside of like newspapers and like the old way of doing things. So I found this job on Craigslist, and this was on a Thursday. They called me on Friday. I did a phone interview with them, and it was just like some like medical billing and coding specialist job, very generic, nothing crazy. So I went in for an interview that next Monday, and the interview went great. It was a fantastic opportunity. They offered me the job, and I started on Tuesday. So I had a job like within just a few days of quitting that other job, which was great. But that job ended up being like one of the best jobs that I ever had, and I got it off of Craigslist, which is so crazy to think about in 2022 because back then Craigslist was where you looked for jobs. I haven't been on Craigslist in years, but I would think that it's going to be like a bunch of like spicy accountant type stuff and like like gig stuff, like come and help me move all my stuff out of my apartment type of thing. But I thought that they like stopped, or they had some like restrictions put in place. Like, I don't even know what's going on with Craigslist now.
Yeah, I'm not either. I know they do still have job postings on there. I did interview once for a position that I found on Craigslist, and it was before I even got into the medical field. I think it was for maybe like a front desk position at a chiropractor office or something. And I went in there and they told me that they had so many people apply and they didn't know what to do about it. So they were literally just interviewing everyone. so, so they were probably wasting a ton of time interviewing like 50 people for one job position that paid probably like all of $9 an hour or something back then. Yeah. So I yeah, definitely don't be looking for medical coding jobs on Craigslist. I don't think that's a good choice. Next on my list, Facebook. So I think there are good options. There's definitely some cautionary areas to be aware of when we're looking for jobs on Facebook. Stacy, let's start with you about Facebook.
So I think Facebook is a good place to look for jobs if you go into specific groups, that have a reputation for putting out legitimate, jobs, good quality jobs. One group that a lot of coders are members of are Jobs for American Medical Coders. So they have a reputation of really monitoring that group. They enforce the rules. The recruiters are in there posting. Other coders can go in there and post job opportunities. So I feel like they do a pretty good job of vetting who's coming into the group and monitoring that. So you can kind of avoid getting caught up with somebody that isn't legitimate. You also have a lot of eagle-eyed group members who are quick to point things out in there. And people are not shy in there as far as, sharing, their opinions on things. So I think social media is just great for networking and then learning, about jobs through networking. And I know we're going to talk about networking separately, So Facebook, I think, is a good way if you're a member of different groups. I don't know, does AAPC, I know they have like groups on Facebook, different ones. Does AAPC have a Facebook group specifically for jobs, or no? Do they just do like paid, job postings, or how does that work with AAPC?
Yeah, so they have, I think technically you're not supposed to post jobs on the Facebook page, but the moderators have a tendency to be a little bit more sympathetic towards those posts and kind of like look the other way because they're beneficial to the members of the group. Um, but they do not have a dedicated group for jobs. I imagine that would be kind of difficult to, like, I wouldn't want to be the moderator for that group because I can only imagine it just becoming a complaint board of I can't find a job
A
and
complete
having to
shit
manage
show.
deleting all of those and having to moderate all of the comments, just getting completely out of control.
Yeah.
But yeah, I know they still do paid postings on the AAPC website. I think you can post jobs on the forum. I think there's just so many places now that are like easily accessible for free to post jobs. I don't know why people would still pay to advertise their jobs places unless it's literally they're saying sending it to a very dedicated email group or something. Like if they have a high level auditing position and they want AAPC to like just target their certified auditors that maybe have like had the certification for X amount of years and blast it out to them. Like I could see maybe targeting and paying for that. But yeah, I don't know that paid job advertisements are really worth their time anymore, considering you can just get so much out for free anymore.
Yeah, so did you notice, this is kind of related, but kind of not, that AAPC now is into staffing services? There's AAPC staffing services where they're doing recruiting for coders because they were coming to me, hey, we have a need for interventional radiology coders, for this client. Are you interested? And I'm like, well, this is what I do. So not for me. And it's like, oh, okay, thank you. I'm like, wow. I'm like, okay. I'm like, now they're opening up into something else and doing recruiting for them. So maybe they wouldn't want to let people get the word out for free now if they're getting into staffing, because I'm sure they're getting paid a nice little fee for doing the staffing. So I guess that becomes a little bit more of a conflict at that point in time if they're moving in that direction.
Yeah, I think they've got a consulting arm as well. They're doing like these big consulting projects. So I guess certifications and books and all of that, it just wasn't enough. So they got to dip their hands in all the pots. But I remember they used to have a lot of job postings on the job forums. I don't really see them now, but they used to have a lot, and you can only access them as members, or at least that's how I remember it. As far as Facebook, so I think Facebook, with anything, obviously use caution, but I do think you can have a lot of traction in the Facebook pages. So our AAPC Facebook group for the Orlando, Florida AAPC chapter, we've had a lot of chapter members get jobs from job postings. So we let recruiters come in and post. We let people within the community post. Just to kind of get the name out there more and more. So I think, Facebook can be a good forum. I will say that the Facebook AAPC groups have changed a lot, in the past few years, like a lot. They're a lot more popular than they used to be. So you just have to be cautious. You have to be careful. If you're in the AAPC certified member group, I think that you'll probably find better hits than with some of the other more generic open groups where anybody can join and there's not really a screening protocol in place.
Yeah, I think you can keep an eye out definitely for some of the postings there. The one thing I would be cautious about though is making sure that you're being tactful where you're requesting for jobs. I see some people that are maybe in like a targeted HCC job and they're like, hey, I'm looking for a new position. Does anyone know of what might be out there right now? And people respond very respectfully and be like, hey, you can check out here and here and here. But if you're posting on like the general AAPC Facebook group where like tens of thousands of people are going to see that, it'll probably just get taken down because you can imagine they don't want to have just floods of people posting every day going, hey, I need a job. Does anyone know where I can find something? And just to kind of, I guess, extend on that a little bit. I know a lot of people get really frustrated about some of these groups. I remember I've seen people in the past that would, for whatever reason, want to comment on people and be like, just search the group, just search the group. Like, okay, not everyone's as tech savvy as you. They just come in, they're excited, they just want to post something and be like, hey, does anyone? So, like, you don't have to be a smart ass to everyone that comes in and joins the group. Like, if you see things that people are asking repeatedly, it takes all of like 2 minutes to just make some scripted language and then just post that in a response. So instead of taking that 2 minutes to be a smart ass, you could literally just copy and paste your standard response to that and actually be helpful to them. Um, so yeah, that's my little stand about that. And I guess Facebook and Instagram are kind of connected now. They're both part of what do they call the metaverse that we're all gonna the metaverse, the Zuckerberg metaverse. So Instagram, I don't see a lot of job postings on Instagram. You know what I do see a lot of on Instagram though that is really frustrating me? Crappy training programs that are like these little fly by night pop-up things and it's like be a medical coder and you can pay, $300 or something and we'll enroll you in our institute. And it's like, does this ever actually work? Like, does anyone actually enroll in your program because they saw your Instagram ad? I'm not sure about that. Next on my list, and I can guess we can kind of group these together. So these are kind of old school, and I definitely think not even worth your time anymore. Monster and Career Builder. Now, back in the day, those used to be like the two main places. And what would eventually happen is you'd start getting some hits that were kind of related to what your resume was. And then you'd start getting all of these places that were like, we need someone to work in the warehouse. We need a salesperson to come on. So I think they're both pretty much dead. Stacy, Monster Career Builder websites, would you agree they're pretty much dead?
Yeah, I would agree. I thought they were because when you say like old school, like when I came out of college, that's where I was. Monster.com was the really big one. And then we had Career Builder, and that's where I was doing my job searches in the 90s. So I feel like Indeed would be the one, obviously, that's kind of replaced the Monster and the Career Builder. But like you said, back in the day, I mean, those were the two places to go if you were doing a job search, and there were a ton of jobs, in HIM and in coding, back then there. But yeah, like I said, I didn't even know they were still up and operational. It's not something that you really see anybody talking about. But yeah, 30 years ago, that's where I was looking.
I still to this day will get these random emails out of the blue from people who were like, I found your resume on Career Builder and we're looking for, a billing supervisor to work for $30,000 a year. And I'm like, pass, thank you. Next.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, I agree. They're outdated.
Yeah. And then next, newspaper ads. Are they still posting jobs in the newspaper back in the day? Like is that still a thing? Like, can you go on your local news outlets and they still have jobs there? Is anyone still getting jobs from there? Have you heard anything, Stace?
I mean, there are still job openings posted in the newspaper. I don't think that they're the types of jobs that we're looking for that are going to be in the newspaper. But again, I'm dating myself. I'm old here in that I would pull out that newspaper, the hard copy of the newspaper back in the 90s, and I would flip through the ads in the newspaper. And there were a lot of jobs in HIM that I found in the newspaper back in the 90s. Now people, we're moving away from printing of newspapers. Eventually, you're not even going to have the physical paper in front of you anymore. But for the types of jobs that people are looking for, probably not. If you're looking for entry-level billing positions, you may find stuff like that. Like local stuff may still be in those publications, but there's not a whole lot there. You're not going to find anything higher level. If you do, it's going to be those basic entry level positions that you're going to see in the newspaper, because most people don't even read newspapers anymore and like look at them. We consume our news so differently. But yeah, I can remember getting out the newspaper and circling ads and then, sending in my resume based on the ads I saw in the in the newspaper.
Did you ever have to like go and go to like the grocery store or the library so you could like fax your resume to them?
I would do that from work. I was already working. So you just kind of throw it on the fax machine at work. If you had to fax it, you sneak it in.
Stand there until you get the confirmation one, and if you don't get it right away, you like start panicking. You're like, "Oh my god, no one else can get this confirmation that I sent my resume out." Yeah.
Or you misdialed the fax number and didn't put the right one in. Oh yeah, those were the good old days.
Or it's busy. Crap, I'm missing my window. It's busy. I gotta come back later when nobody's around.
Oh my gosh. There are still some practices that still fax things. It always blows my mind when they're like, "Can I fax you?" And I'm like, "What?" I have a fax number, but like, it's just crazy.
Even eFax. I mean, I had an eFax for years, and then I stopped using eFax. I don't even have an eFax anymore because I wasn't using eFax. I mean, at least that was going to your computer if somebody was sending you a fax. But I'm like, there's no reason. You scan everything now. And you secure, transmit it. Why are we doing but there's still people with eFax. And you're right, fax numbers. And people talk about faxing, like dealing with the IRS, fax. So what? I'm faxing something to the IRS? Are you kidding me? Like that just boggles my mind.
Oh my gosh, this just popped up into my mind. We used to have issues. The first organization I worked for, when you would have to dial out from the organization, you would have to hit a 9, and then you would have to, for the long distance, hit the 1. So people were going into the fax machine and accidentally dialing 911, and and we were getting all of these complaints from the operator services that all of these 911 calls were coming from the building because someone kept going to the fax machine and accidentally, dialing 911.
Or how about people trying to fax to your actual phone number, and you would pick up the phone and you hear the beep, beep. Or on the flip side, you have the fax that does the automatic redial. So if you're on that end, you hear the person saying, "Hello, hello, hello." Oh gosh, yeah, fax machines were so much fun.
In your area, Tony, do they still do like newspaper ads for jobs? I feel like some of the hospitals might still be doing that.
No, I mean, to be honest with you, I have not looked at a newspaper in a very long time. I don't even remember the last time. It may have been on a flight where they just like gave it out, and they used to do that, but I haven't looked in the newspaper. I will tell you that I think some of the hidden gems a lot of times are advertised at the local workforce connections or the local workforce solutions. Like a lot of jobs that would typically be posted in a newspaper, I think get posted in those settings because there's like, programs and things to help people get back to work and navigate all of that stuff. So I've seen a lot of like government type jobs like VA and like public health departments, local public health departments advertise their jobs through that avenue rather than like the newspaper.
Yeah, I think so many organizations now have their own website that they know that if they post it on their website, it'll probably get picked up by Indeed. Plus, so many people just like, especially in healthcare, they kind of know to go to their local hospital's website and just go to the jobs section and look there, that it's not really worthwhile to waste a lot of time posting elsewhere. So that's one of the things I always tell people is like, if you have a local hospital or healthcare organization that you want to work for, like go directly onto their website because they have so many people probably looking. They don't waste a lot of energy like searching out until after it's been a certain amount of time that they've not been able to fulfill that position.
That reminded me of something really quick. So do you guys remember when you had to like go into the place and ask the person for an application for the job? Like you couldn't do it online. Do you remember that? It was always so nerve-wracking because they would give you these like weird looks like, who are you to be asking for an application for a job? There wasn't just to go online and do the portal.
Mm-hmm. And re-input all of the information that we're going to ask you to attach on your resume, right? Worthless. And then finally, last thing, networking. Stacy, let's talk about networking.
Yeah, I think networking is one of the best ways to find a job. If you build a really great network of professionals, either virtually or in person. I think, it's good to have like the combined network of virtual and in person. LinkedIn is a great place to connect virtually. The in-person networking, attend, any local AAPC meetings, any local HIM association meetings, get involved if you're an AHIMA member at the state level. Volunteer. I can tell you that because of my volunteer experience, anytime I was volunteering for something, serving on a committee or in a leadership role, I always found out about jobs before anybody else did, because the people that you're working alongside with, a lot of times they're in the know about job openings, or they're directly responsible for hiring. So that's always a really, big help. And if you shine as a volunteer and in a leadership role and they see that, and then a job opens, then it's going to open up an opportunity that maybe you wouldn't have gotten before. And then, LinkedIn, I feel, is invaluable, because there you can go and you can connect with so many different people who are doing so many different jobs in so many different settings. A lot of companies have LinkedIn pages. You can go follow them on LinkedIn. You can find out about companies you want to work for. You can connect with employees that are working for that employer. And that's a great way to get questions answered. Try to build a relationship with people who are working somewhere that you want to go to work, at, or if there's a certain type of position that you want, you can go on LinkedIn and you can find people with those job titles, and you can reach out to them and you can connect with them and try to build a relationship. And it's really just a great place for information gathering, I think, and doing a lot of your research for careers. And then once again, the more people then the more job opportunities you're going to know about. So yes, there's that job, search function on LinkedIn, but this is more about building relationships and then finding jobs that way, and then just hearing about things word of mouth. A lot of times things don't even get posted anywhere. Sometimes it's simply, who and being in the right place at the right time. So I think the bigger that you can make your network, the better. But remember, when you're networking, that there's like a give and take. There has to be like a benefit, like both ways. When you're networking, you don't just want to network and say, what can I get out of this? What about me? What opportunities are there for me? But how can I help other people in the networking process? And then that's what helps people remember you. If you can bring something to the table and help them out for something that they're working on or they're looking for.
Yeah, totally. I couldn't agree more. I think networking is the best way to find a great position. Word of mouth is so important. So, as far as Alpha Coding Experts, so our company, we do not post any job postings. All hiring decisions are word of mouth or referrals. We don't post jobs, and we've gotten, obviously we've, had not so good people, but we've had very, very good luck recruiting directly from local AAPC chapter. I've hired people out of my chapter. Clients come to me all the time and say, hey, this person's retiring, or this person found another job, and they're like, the glue that holds it all together. Can you help me find somebody? They're not going to post that job. That job is never going to see, any type of job posting or forum. It's going to be filled through word of mouth. So when you have that expansive network of people that you can tap into, that is truly your best resource. And like Stacy said, it has to be mutually beneficial. It can't just be take. It's got to be, that mutual beneficial value add. So networking, the best way, in my opinion, to find, the best type of jobs.
Yeah, I really like that. And I think it's just so important to get out there and connect with people, and not even just your local chapters. Like I used to love when I worked in healthcare in larger organizations, to go out and just network with people in other departments, because sometimes you would open up your eyes as far as some of their needs, and you would be able to even pull in some people to work that were aspiring coders but needed something, and you're like, oh hey, you know what, I know they need a pre-authorization person over in this department over here, and help kind of shuffle people that way. But yeah, it's important to network in the right way. I mean, I'm sure we all get these DMs from people, hey, I just got certified, can you help me find a job? And I have my resources that I can give people. But it's very difficult when it's just so cold and you don't know this person. You don't know if they just got their CPC 2 days ago and they have an associate's degree. You don't know if they took the weekend boot camp and they don't really know how to practically code. They just know how to answer the questions for the exam. And oftentimes like your heart bleeds for some of these people. I mean, I get these emails from people who are like, Victoria, I'm a single mom and I'm divorced and I just got over cancer and I just am trying to turn my life around with medical coding and I can't find a job. And it's like, oh my gosh, like I feel terrible, but like I can't sit and navigate 76,000 subscribers to their jobs. So that's why I think it's good to get out, network with those people in your local chapter as well, because you never know, even if it's someone from who's maybe not even working in coding, if it's someone who's a practice manager at a hospital, they might be able to find something for you, but make sure it's not that networking where you're just like, hey, I need a job, where you're literally just talking to other people, finding out about them personally a little bit too, where they work, if they like it there. I think networking is probably the biggest one. And it's harder, I think, maybe these days with the virtual settings that we're in, but there's still, like we've talked about, there's still the Facebook, there's still LinkedIn, there's still ways that you can do it online. So we've talked about kind of the job search. So let's talk about the hiring process as well. So one thing that I'm kind of opinionated about is when organizations say, yeah, we're going to give you a job, but you have to pay for your training or you have to pay for your equipment. Stacy, you're nodding your head. You feel the same way, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely, well, I mean, unless you're an independent contractor, then the expectation is that you have your own computer, your own equipment. If somebody's promising you like a W-2 position and they're saying, hey, you need to give us money, then no. But you wouldn't be buying equipment from them. I guess that's the point that we're trying to make. Hey, you need to purchase equipment from us. Versus me, when I used to work as a 1099, the expectation is Stacy has her own computer. Stacy has her own coding book. She has everything that she needs. So you do have that out there. But anytime you have to pay money, for something like that from that particular, to have their equipment that they're issuing you, that would be like a red flag, because either you have your own already, that's the expectation, or if you're going to be employed, then they're going to be providing it for you. And there shouldn't be any cost associated with that. And don't give out any financial information or personal information, banking information, social security number. I think that kind of goes without saying. That's the kind of information that you definitely don't give out right away. And I see people who ask like for social security number, like right off the bat, like in an application process for jobs. And I'm like, I don't think you should do that, because people don't feel comfortable with that. When you get to the point where there's an offer on the table and you need that information, then fine. But why are we collecting this so early in the process when that is our identity? Who needs that? So if somebody wants your personal information too soon in the process, to me, that's a red flag.
I'm just going to jump on that because it is kind of a gray area. And this is something that came up with me. So I have partnerships with Code Health, which is kind of like this Uber gig work like platform for medical coders where they work 1099 pay per chart. And the first complaint I get, because I work with a lot of startups, people are questioning things reasonably so. Is they're like, oh, well, they're asking for my personal information. They're asking for my social security number. They're asking for my address, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, which, yeah, you should be cautious about that. I understand that. But also, if you're working for Instacart, you're working for Uber, you're working for any gig work platform, first off, they're going to ask you that. So when I was talking with Code Health about how to kind of navigate that, and they said, well, yeah, not only that, but we have to make sure that they're not on the, oh gosh, it's blanking from my mind, that they're not excluded from the Medicare program. And so we have to run their social for that as well. And I'm like, oh, I didn't even, it didn't even cross my mind. I was just thinking about, yeah, we have to have their information to deposit the checks. And I wasn't even thinking about the Medicare exclusion list. So I think that's probably more the exception than anything else,
Right.
but definitely, yeah, still be
To
very
me-
cautious about
To
giving
me,
out
that
that
makes
information.
sense because of their business model. It makes sense. It's kind of like on-demand work, like on-demand coding. So you provide that information. Everybody's a 1099, in that process. Just like when I've done 1099 work in the past, before I had my own company, you would say, okay, I'm signing up to do per diem work. It's the same concept. So you provided all the information to them up front before they ever sent you one piece of work because you're a per diem coder. So I think, again, looking at the model and something like that, like if I wanted to pick up extra work for I'd have no problem going on to Code Health and giving that information now because I understand how the business model works and there's a purpose. But when you have this process and they're not doing interviews and they're not screening and it's not this, the same process. If somebody's collecting information from applicants and then after that, they're going to decide who they're going to interview and then they're going to whittle people down. There is no reason, I don't feel there's no reason why anybody needs that information unless there is an offer to work on the table. And to me, Code has already got the offer to work on the table. So it makes perfect sense. And then they need your banking information to pay you when work comes across. So, hey, bring it.
What do you think, Tony, about paying for training in order to get a position?
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. I mean, it's a huge red flag if they're asking you to pay for stuff. But, I do think that there's certain things that as a coding professional, you just need to have in your arsenal, right? Like if you have a W-2 position, yes, they're supposed to provide you with, certain things. I have in my experience when I was, a W-2 employee before, obviously went out on my own and started my own company, where the tools they provided were not adequate. They were inadequate tools, just like the most ridiculous type of code search. They wouldn't give, books, or they would give you books, but they wouldn't give you an encoder access. So you gotta kind of think about that. I know for me, I'm, Optum 360 Encoder Pro through and through. Like that's, what I use. That's what I'm used to. So I'll foot the bill of having to, pay for that resource because it's important to me and it's going to make me more efficient. If you're one of those people that, you like the books and your employer won't buy the books, then you may have to, purchase those on your own. But that's just part of working as a medical coder. You've got to have the right tools and the right resources, and you've got to know what works for you. As an employer, I can definitely understand some of the reasons why employers have, the mindset that they don't want to pay for certain things. I have people come in that are new employees and they get hired and they just are entitled. They think that we're supposed to part the ocean and give them any and everything that they ask for because, they asked for it. And that's just ridiculous. We have tools, we have resources, that are available to everybody. But at the end of the day, those are the tools and resources that we provide. If you want something beyond that, then it's on you to pay for. I also have a lot of people that come in and say, like, you should pay for my membership dues or you should pay for my CEUs. And it's like, yikes. If that's part of your employment agreement, great. But if it's not something that's been agreed upon, you just started working with that company, like, why would you expect them to cover your membership dues? That's just a ridiculous expectation. That's your responsibility. People that have medical licenses and they're lawyers, like they have fees that are associated with the profession regardless of where they work. So if your employer will cover those things, great. If not, it shouldn't be an expectation across the board.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I could see if maybe it was a position where they were looking to train someone in medical coding, but even so, I think that's just a whole sketchy thing. If they're like, we want to train you in medical coding, I mean, specialty wise, yeah, I just don't think you should have to pay for any on the job training. That really should be something that the company is paying you for, not vice versa. Next thing I want to talk about is these organizations where you come in and they interview you and they go, oh, we're not really like other organizations. We're a family here. We're just like a big old family, and everyone is just like your aunts and uncles and cousins. And that's been, I think, a big buzz that's been going around, is that concept of these organizations that say that we're like a family together. Stacy, how do you feel about that?
So I think most families are dysfunctional. So when somebody says something like that to me, I don't necessarily consider that a good thing, that, we're a family. I don't know. I mean, that could be a good thing because there are small businesses where they do, work more cohesively as a family, not the dysfunctional family. It can be done, but I think people just use that very casually. And I think that's kind of what you're like alluding to, that could potentially, be a red flag as far as that's concerned. So that's not going to sway me like one way or the other. I mean, personally, I'm going to look bigger picture, like beyond that. You can say that. You might even think that. It doesn't mean it's true. Somebody could be telling you that's the case, and it could be a nightmare behind the scenes, and you wouldn't necessarily know that until you get into the job. So if somebody's trying to really sell you on how great it is, that might actually like cause a red flag, because do you really need to spend so much time selling me and how great it is to work here? If that's the case. So I might feel like they're trying to cover something up if they're trying a little bit too hard to convince me.
Yeah, it's almost like, okay, how functional is your family? Because like that could either be a really good thing or a really bad thing. Like if somebody tells me that, like that's probably a red flag. Yeah, I think that's just wild. So a lot of this goes back to the toxic work environment, toxic work culture of like this relationship of employee and employer is a transactional relationship, right? It is transactional. You're there to provide a service. You're there to provide, your time in exchange for money. That's what you're there for. And so when employers try to muddy the waters and, make it like, oh, we're a family, so families care about each other and families go above and beyond, then you can get exploited. You can get gaslit. It's happened to me, throughout my career. I've had very good work environments. I've had very toxic work environments, and the ones where they're like Stacy said, trying to convince you that this is a good environment or convince you, we're like a family. Those are the most toxic environments because the relationship is transactional in nature, but there's obviously a human element to it. So, at our company, we care about people. Obviously we want the best for people. When somebody comes to me and they say like, hey, I want to go work for this company or I want to do this, there's no hard feelings. It's like, please go and do, what's going to make you happy, what's best for you. But at the same time, as an employer, like I know, because I've been an employee, like my work is not my life. Like my work is not my top priority. People have families, they have lives, they have, diseases and all of these things that are happening outside of work that are priority. And so you've just got to be, mindful of that, because when employers try to say under the guise of we're a family, a lot of times it comes with unrealistic expectations, toxicity, gaslighting. So I think that's a major red flag.
Yeah, I feel like the family environment, it's like, no, work is work, family is family. I don't want to live at work. I like hobbies. I like spending time with my friends. These I appreciate wanting to build community and wanting to build working together, and that I hate to say this word because it's just about synergy, that synergy together. But uh yeah, I think we have to keep that separation. Work-life balance is just so important. Burnout is real. It's gotten so bad over the past couple of years, and people I think are really waking up and really being more steadfast in setting their boundaries. And I think the new generation that we have coming up is going to really be surprising for some people how much they're going to start going back to setting boundaries and leaving work at work and not wanting to be bestie buddies and develop mommy daddy relationships with their bosses. Next thing I want to talk about in the interview hiring process is these pre-employment exams. So I'll start out. One of the things that I think can be a huge red flag is these pre-employment exams that first off have clear mistakes on them. And second off, when they are ridiculously way more than they should be. So I've had like cases where I would applying in the past for like an E&M coding position. And they're like, yeah, we want you to audit like 20 charts, provide your rationale, provide your audit score sheets. That's extensive for a pre-employment exam. I think that it's okay to ask to audit a couple of charts and see how you feel. And then also I don't know, I have a thing about pre-employment exams, especially in our industry, because some of these you look at with E&M, it's like you can look at the same chart and you're like, this could be an office visit, this could be a nursing facility visit. Like, you're not giving me information. This could be a different code because the patient has Medicare. And when you're just like handing someone a chart and giving no context of it, and then you're just going, you got it wrong. Like, did I really? Or did you not give me the right information that I needed to code this? And you didn't read my little paragraph that I wrote you on the bottom telling me, telling you that you didn't. Stacy, what's your thoughts on the pre-employment exam process?
So I think they can be very useful as an employer. I have, used them myself. I've also taken them as a potential employee. Like you say, when there's like a lot of mistakes in a pre-employment like test, that kind of gives me pause. I feel that sometimes they're like a little too rigid, I would say, or like you're saying, oh, here, give me, audit these charts or review or code these charts, whatever the case may be. I think that's like helpful to a certain degree. I don't know. I have mixed feelings because I don't like it as the applicant, like some of the hoops I've had to jump through. So I've been on that side of it in the past. But then on the flip side, like most recently, I was doing screening for a client of mine to help them, find some candidates. And there was a pre-employment test. And somebody just flat out refused and said, I'm not going to do this because it's too much and it's too long and forget it. And I'd be perfect for the job and I'm great and I'm all that, but I'm not taking your test. And I was like, well, okay, with that attitude, then you're not gonna, get it. And it was probably, the test would take anywhere from 60 to 90 minutes, depending upon, how fast you are. So low end, you're looking at 60 minutes, like longer, you're looking at 90. And for the level of skill that we're looking for, again, it also is dependent upon the job. I didn't feel like it was that bad. It was multiple choice in the first section. Then it was assigning diagnosis codes, primary and secondary. And then you had some reports at the end. So some of it was quicker and some of it was more detailed. And there were a lot of people who took it. And I found in this test that most people were failing the pre-employment test, which was like very like eye-opening. But I wrote it specifically to find those problem areas that I always catch in audits when I'm auditing clients. And I'm like, darned if everybody didn't fall into the trap like on this test on like everything. That I usually find. I'm like, well, if we're going to hire off of this, then we're just going to have to find somebody and train them because this is not helping me find, someone. So I think what I don't like about the pre-employment test is that often when you take it, you don't necessarily get feedback. And I'm guilty of this with some of the candidates I dealt with. I didn't give them feedback on it and I probably should have, but I dropped the ball like on that, where you don't know, there's no mechanism for feedback because I've taken tests and I'm like, I know there's not a correct answer here. I know for a fact there isn't a correct answer and you're forcing me into this and I want to be able to have a discussion. And so if you're going to do a pre-employment test, I think there should be communication about the test. And again, I've dropped the ball on that myself when I've asked people to do it, but I think that that's really important. And if it's just a closed process, then I think sometimes that can, raise a red flag. If there isn't a feedback loop, if there's an open feedback loop, then they're legit and they want to find the best candidates and they want to learn from that pool of candidates as well and identify potential problems, maybe with their screening process.
Yeah, I think what you said, Stacy, is right on the money. They can be a very useful tool. They're not a like yes or no, like yes, we should hire them. No, it's just a tool in the process. So, I mean, I think about this from the lens of being a hiring manager, using and administering pre-employment exams and how valuable they can be because, I would always preface any of the pre-employment screenings with, this test is not about accuracy. It's about determining how you think. The more information you put in, your explanations, your rationale is going to help me because then I can tell what your thought process is, how analytical you are, really how you think. And so if the pre-employment exam is modeled that way, instead of so black and white, like A, B, C, D, and this is the right answer, this is, all of these other answers are wrong, I think it can be much more effective. But it's kind of up to whoever's making those decisions in the process. I remember I wrote a pretty extensive pre-employment exam. It was 20 questions, so it wasn't extensive, but there were people that would be finished in an hour. And then there were people that would tell me it took them days. And so that was also a really good gauge of, how do they approach things, and how is their time management, and like, are they going to overthink every little thing? Because if they are, then that's not going to be a good fit. Are they decisive, or are they thoughtful enough in their thought process to be able to think critically? Those are things that you can really glean from a pre-employment exam. I remember the last job that I worked at before I started my company, they had us jumping through like crazy hoops. I mean, it was insane. So I think it depends on the position and what's involved in that position. So we're going to get into this in a minute, where, we kind of talk about the different layers of the interview. But for this particular job, I had a lot of responsibility. I had to do compliance audits. I had to do compliance education with the providers, with the physicians. I had to do compliance education with their coding team. I had to do compliance education with the hospital operations leadership team. So they needed to make sure that the people they were bringing in were seasoned and they could hit the ground running. So they had us do a mock audit report, and a mock delivery. And then they had us actually do 2 different training sessions where we basically treated it like, the person that was making the decision, we treated them like they were the provider, and we went through their audit results with them. And then we also had to do a separate one for operations leadership and the financial leadership. And that exercise, although it was really annoying in the moment because there were so many layers, it was a fantastic exercise because it weeded out the people that would not have been successful in those positions. Had they not gone through those layers of pre-employment assessment, then, it could have been detrimental to the organization, because when you bring people in that don't know what they're doing in a compliance role, an education role, they can completely wreak havoc on the organization, right? They can go out and tell providers that they can do all these things that they can't. And, there's really no safeguard for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. There's just certain things that, even though if maybe they don't know the technical skills, you need to know and assess if they are able to piece it together. Like, I remember I was in an interview process once with someone for an auditing position. And I wasn't the hiring person, but I was just someone on the team. So we were making sure that they were the right fit for the team. And one of the questions posed was, if you don't know the answer to a difficult coding question, like a provider's asking you, like, what do you do? And they're like, oh, well, I'll just go and ask someone else on my team what the answer is. Like, okay. We need you to be able to research and find out the answers on your own, not just go and take the word of someone else. So yeah, I think pre-employment exams can be helpful. When I was working as a supervisor, we used to give a pretty standard pre-employment exam, and it wasn't like a pass fail. It was kind of like we need to see how much training we might need to put into you, if there's a certain area where you might be better. Like, maybe we do have something open for general surgery, but then we see that you do really good on the OBGYN questions, and maybe we should switch the OBGYN person over, or, have you cross-train in that area. So it was really more of an assessment of, like, are you a good fit? And, I like how Tony kind of mentioned how some people will take the extraordinary amount of time to answer the, small amount of questions. It's also that assessment of, like, are you going to just sit there and fester over the question for like 2 hours, or are you just going to go, you know what, I've given this enough thought, it's not going to come to me, I'm going to just give my rationale the best that I can. One thing that I'd like to discuss next then is, you're going in for a position. I always personally like to ask, how did this position become open? Is it because they're promoting within? Is it because they have a high turnover rate? Stacy, do you think that turnover rate in and of itself is a red flag?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm going to answer this question more broadly, because that was one of the points that I had made notes on. So I'm quickly going to go through these, because I know we're over, a little bit over our hour that we usually run. So just some general tips. And these are from a presentation I did recently. So obviously, you always want to research the company that you're going to before the interview. That's a good thing, to make sure you go in there armed with as much information about them as possible. And you want to prepare a list of questions to ask during the interview. And so these are some of the questions that I recommend that you ask. Now, some of these are only if you're in person in a facility, they would apply. They wouldn't apply to virtual. And some of these may seem a little ballsy, like a little like demanding, but if you can get these things, then you're probably got a good employer if they're willing to give you the things that you're asking for. So some of the questions to ask: is the position a new position? That, could be, if it's brand new, you may be walking into a nightmare if nobody knows what the heck is going on, and you got to kind of build something like on your own. Some people like that. I would like that. I would thrive in an environment like that with very little guidance, and I get to build it. Not everybody would. How long did the last person work in the position, and why did they leave? And so that ties into that turnover rate, if they're willing to share that. If there's a high turnover in that position, then obviously there are going to be some problems within that position. Then you also want to know, what are my opportunities for advancement? Ask them if you can have a tour of the facility, of the department. You can get in and get introductions to people who are already working there, kind of see if you can sense the vibe in the department, maybe talk to some people. May I meet some of the staff? And then some of the other things that you want to ask are, do you have tuition reimbursement? Do you pay for credential exams? Do you pay membership dues? And do you pay for attendance at conferences? These are all legitimate questions. And if you've got a good employer, they will answer all of these questions for you. You may not like all the answers, like they may not pay for your credential exams, they may not pay for membership dues and things of that nature, but it's important to know those like going in. So I kind of just wanted to tie those all together because I know we're going to be wrapping up. So those are just some of the questions that I ask that everyone, or those are some of the questions that I recommend that everyone asks during that interview process.
Those are great tips. I like what you said, Stacey. Like, what are the vibes? Like, that's kind of what you need to know. Like, what are the vibes here? Yeah, as far as turnover rate, I think it can be a little bit misleading because people leave jobs for different reasons, right? Like somebody may have just had a baby and they decided they didn't come back to work, or maybe they went through a series of bad people coming in, and so that's why there was more turnover. So I think turnover rate it can be misleading. It can certainly be telling, but you want to look deeper into what's behind the statistic. I think it's always nice when I do different assessments and I work with different organizations, and it's always nice to hear from the employers that like everybody's been there for 10 years, or people are retiring from that company because it's such a great place to work. And I think that is definitely telling. How long are the most senior people? How long have they worked there? What are the dynamics behind all of that? Is this a mom and pop type of situation? Is this like a more corporate enterprise? Are there, pretty extensive pensions or retirement benefits? Because those things contribute to how long people stay.
I agree. I think there's sometimes reasoning why the turnover is what it is, but it's definitely something to inquire about when you're in that interview process. And I'm just looking over my outline here, and I realized I completely skipped over the whole section about resumes and went right into interview hiring process. And we're like already over time. We're probably going to have to make resumes like they're a whole other episode, like do a whole episode just on tips and things to avoid on your resume, because I think there's definitely some really good things that I want to talk about, and I'm sure we still, about the cover letters and the putting your little personal statements and things on your resume these days. So let's kind of wrap up, since we are getting a little further on time, and kind of group these last two together. So we have two extremes. We have either you get hired with no interview, like you send your resume and they're like, hey, we hire you. And the other extreme is they keep bringing you back, and you have to do like repeat interviews. You interview with the boss, and then you interview with the team, and then it's like, oh, we'll have to come in for the third interview to make sure that you're really the right candidate. Stacey, what do you feel about these two extremes of the number of interviews? Are there red flags on the no interview? Are there red flags as well on the, we're bringing you in for repeated interviews?
Yeah, no interview is kind of crazy to me. I don't know why anybody would hire without an interview. I think with what we do, you can't do that. If they're hiring without an interview, then I would question their legitimacy, because our profession, being what it is, I don't think that you can do that, there. And then as far as the multiple interviews, I don't feel, in most situations, again, there are unique scenarios, and Tony touched on this a little bit. I don't think there's any reason to go beyond 2 interviews for almost every position that's out there. The first one would be like maybe a more general screening position. Maybe HR brings you in, they talk to you, and then you go on to a second, but whatever, you start somewhere. But what I like, for interviews, when I used to go out and interview, what I loved was panel interviews. I preferred a panel interview over a one-on-one interview. So rather than going through multiple interviews, oh, you're going to meet with this person, then you got to come back and you got to meet with these people. And then if you're a good fit for them, then we're going to pass you to this, level. Put the whole team in a room and let all of them ask me questions at the same time. I think that is, the best use of the the interviewee's time. I mean, most people are probably already working a job when they're looking for another job. They don't have time to do multiple interviews. And I'm sure you've seen this trend on LinkedIn where people talk about this. It's a popular topic across industries that people are taking other jobs. By the time they get a job offer from an employer, 3 months into the interview process, they're like, sorry, I've moved on. I've gone somewhere else. So what are they gaining by drawing out, the process? So I feel like 2 interviews max should be sufficient, unless it's something so highly specialized where you need another level. But I know some jobs even do psychological testing and all this other stuff, and you're doing all these things. And I'm like, that's too much. I'm so thankful I don't have to interview anymore. I don't have to go through that job process. So for me, it should be 2 and no more, again, unless it's something just so highly specialized, it requires something more. And there aren't that many positions that I think would need that. At least in our field, 2 should be sufficient. I don't think we need more.
Yeah, I agree, Stacy, and I think the panel interviews is the best. It shows that the company is efficient, they're organized, and they've got the process dialed in. I think that it's ridiculous to bring somebody in for 3 or more interviews. I don't understand that as an employer. If I'm excited about somebody, if I'm jazzed about somebody, like I want to get them in right away. I want to, obviously I'm going to talk to them. I may talk to them more than once, but I want to see what they can do, because after hiring for years and years and years, I've seen so many people that interview amazing. You think they're going to be great, and then they start and it's like, who the heck is this person? Because this is not who I interviewed. So I've seen people interview very well and then perform very poorly. And then I've seen the opposite, where people interview very poorly because they're nervous and, they just don't interview well, but they're a fantastic employee. They do a great job. So I think interviews are important. Obviously, communication is important, but 3 or more interviews or anything more than 2, I think it's ridiculous. It's overkill. And in 2022, it's just not even sustainable, because like people are interviewing for multiple jobs and they're not just going to wait for you to tell them that you've decided that they're good enough. Like it's a ridiculous expectation. Now, not being interviewed at all, I think, is also a red flag, right? Like, you need to get to know somebody, and there's certain things, due diligence has to be exercised before you bring somebody into a company. So both extremes are ridiculous, but the extreme of interview, test, interview, like I think that it's just ridiculous that people are still doing that. And if it's something that you are currently experiencing in your job search, that's a red flag for the employer. They don't have their stuff together, they're not decisive, and it's probably not a situation you want to go into.
Yeah, I think definitely in our industry, it wouldn't be appropriate. I could see maybe other things like you're interviewing to be like dean of a very high class college or something. Yes, in those situations. For a medical coding or auditing type of position, no. What I think even the due diligence that you said, Tony, like even if you kind of know you're going to hire the person, you still should be going through with the interview process. I had one candidate that I hired as a supervisor that I had was probably 90% positive that I was going to wind up hiring them. They came very highly recommended from the head of the emergency department. The physician just had such complimentary things to say about this person. They were already working, I think, in scheduling or something. So they knew like the EMR. They just were very great. Like their wife was an RN. So we knew it was a shoo-in, but we still had to go in and interview that candidate. They were nervous as hell. And I shouldn't even say this because this is so bad, but I remember It was one of my first interviews with them, and I could tell they were nervous, so to break the ice, I'm like it was right before, I think, like, Batman versus Superman came out, and I'm like, "Now this last question I have for you, sir, is very important. So Batman versus Superman's coming out this summer. Who do you think's gonna win?" And he's like, "Oh, Batman 100% of the way." Funny story, he was actually a huge Batman fanatic, so when we hired him, we always had these jokes back and forth, like, he would go and get Batman tattoos, and he'd come over all excited and, like, tell me, or he'd go to the comic book shop, and it was funny how we kind of bonded over that then, but yeah.
How cute that you were breaking the ice.
And then, I like the panel interviews as well. One thing that I used to do, because I picked it up from my boss, that I think was just so wonderful is, when we were bringing on a candidate, we'd have them sit with me or the director, and they would interview, with the person that was going to manage them. And then we would turn them over to the rest of the team. And that way, the team could see if they were a good fit for the rest of the team. And they could also ask questions of the people already working there. So we would close the door so they could be like, "Hey, is Victoria like the worst boss in the world? Like, you got to tell me." So it was kind of that nice give and take. Like, we got to make sure that it was a fit in both directions. So I think the panel interview is good in that aspect as well. So we have toxic work oh, you know what? I almost forgot shoe and tell. Oh my God, Stacy. I
almost forgot about that too. Oh my goodness. So we'll do it really quickly. So of course, I've been shoe shopping since the last episode. I'm shoe shopping in between like every episode. That like never stops. So Dillard's had an amazing 65% off sale, like on their shoes, like clearance. So I grabbed like these like beauties at Dillard's. Actually grabbed more than one pair at Dillard's that day. Surprise, surprise. There's a second pair, which I will show in the next shoe and tell. So I have more bling to add to my closet. And after reorganizing my shoe closet recently, it's now full again and I'm at capacity. And now I need to find more room. So haven't worn these yet, but I am looking forward to sporting these really soon.
Oh, those are cute.
Super blinged out.
So to wrap up, toxic work environments are all around us, and sometimes they can be disguised as very good opportunities. So before you jump into a job that seems too good to be true, make sure that if it doesn't feel right, you're doing some investigating, you're checking with your network, you're researching their website, ask your friends, ask your colleagues if they know anything about the organization, because sometimes you can be surprised about what you hear. And if you've already made that jump and you're starting to regret it, don't worry, because just work on your escape plan, figure out how you're getting to the next opportunity. So thank you for listening to another episode of the Coding Consultant Confessions. Don't forget to leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform, and then join us next time for another confession.
Thank you for tuning in to Coding Consultant Confessions with Tony Elholmes, Stacy Buck, and Victoria Mole. Unfiltered, unedited, unapologetic. Connect with the Coding Consultant Confessions podcast on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook. Simply search for Coding Consultant Confessions on any of these platforms to connect and engage with Tony, Stacy, and Victoria.